He never thought one promise could change everything. Ethan Walker stood at the edge of the half-built construction site, watching the sunset melt over the city skyline. The wind brushed dust across his face, but he barely felt it. All he could think about was his father's voice, steady, proud, and gone forever. This was supposed to be their dream project, a modern commercial complex that would carry the Walker name. Now it stood half-finished, like a wound that refused to heal. Ethan had poured everything into it, his savings, his time, even his sleep. But every passing day made the dream feel smaller. The workers were losing hope. Payments were late. Investors had stopped returning his calls. The weight of failure pressed down like the steel beams that surrounded him. How do you rebuild your life when your foundation is already cracked? That's when she appeared, Claire Dawson, the new site inspector. She walked across the gravel with a kind of quiet confidence that made people step aside. Her first glance around the site told her everything: chaos, stress, and a man trying too hard to hide it. She looked at Ethan and said calmly, "You can't build anything strong if your foundation is fear." Her tone wasn't harsh. It was firm, honest, the kind of truth Ethan hadn't heard in a long time. He didn't know whether to argue or thank her. Instead, he just nodded, unsure what to say. For weeks, the project had felt like a storm he couldn't control, but something in her voice, it steadied him. That evening, as the workers left, Ethan stayed behind. The site grew quiet except for the hum of a distant generator. He ran his fingers along the cool concrete pillar his father once touched. "You always said everything could be fixed, Dad," he whispered. "But what if I can't fix this?" The sky turned darker, and he remembered his father's favorite saying, "Concrete cracks, son, but only when it's left alone too long." Maybe that was true for people too. Maybe he'd left his own heart alone for too long. What if help comes from the person you least expect? The next morning, Claire arrived early, clipboard in hand, her hair tied back, ready to work. Ethan noticed how she moved, focused, quick, no hesitation. She inspected the materials, noted down faults, and didn't sugarcoat anything. "Your supply team's cutting corners," she said. "You can't afford that right now," he sighed. "You think I don't know that?" She met his eyes. "Then stop pretending you can do everything alone." The words hit hard because they were true. Ethan had been trying to carry his father's legacy, the project's pressure, and his grief all at once. But now there was someone who wasn't afraid to challenge him, and it stirred something inside. By lunchtime, she was sketching corrections on the blueprint table, and Ethan found himself listening more than talking. They worked side by side, arguing about measurements, debating material choices, but somehow, the tension between them started to feel alive. That night, as he locked up the site, Ethan noticed Claire's jacket still hanging on a chair. He smiled faintly and placed it neatly by the office door. For the first time in months, he felt like maybe, just maybe, things could turn around. Can one stranger's faith rebuild what life has broken? Over the next few days, things began to shift. Workers started showing up early again. Orders were being processed on time. The air on site didn't feel as heavy anymore. And at the center of it all was Claire. Calm, focused, unshaken. She wasn't just fixing blueprints. She was fixing morale. Ethan found himself watching her more than he wanted to admit. The way she tied her hair when she concentrated. The way her voice softened when talking to the workers. She had a way of bringing light to places that had gone dim. But behind that calm face, she carried her own secrets. Late one night, Ethan saw her sitting alone in the temporary office, staring at old project files. Her eyes were tired, her expression unreadable. When she noticed him, she quickly closed the folder. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Something like that," she replied with a half-smile. He didn't push further, but something told him she was fighting her own battle, one that looked a lot like his. The next morning, as the crew gathered for inspection, Claire stopped mid-sentence, her brow furrowing. She flipped through the blueprint pages quickly, scanning the foundation drawings. "Wait," she whispered. "This can't be right," Ethan frowned. "What's wrong?" She pointed at the design. "This section here. The support beams are misaligned. If you continue building like this, the structure will shift weight unevenly. Ethan's stomach dropped. That's impossible. My father approved that design himself. She didn't look up. Then your father missed something big. The silence between them stretched. Ethan felt the air leave his chest. His father, the man who taught him everything about construction, couldn't have made such a mistake. And yet, the evidence was right there on paper. He shook his head. You must be wrong. Claire's voice softened. I wish I were. What do you do when the truth threatens the memory of the one you love most? Ethan stepped back, staring at the blueprints. The foundation his father designed wasn't stable enough for the expansion. If Claire was right, fixing it would mean tearing down part of what already stood. The part his father had worked on before he died. The thought made him sick. He couldn't bear the idea of destroying his father's last work. But if he ignored it, the building could fail completely. The crew noticed the tension. Whispers started to spread, rumors about design flaws, about the project being cursed. Ethan could feel control slipping through his fingers again. Claire followed him to the edge of the site. Ethan, she said quietly, you have to face this. He stared at the steel frame reaching into the sky. You don't understand, he muttered. This isn't just concrete and beams. It's him. It's all I have left. She took a deep breath, then honor him by doing what's right, not what's easy. Her words lingered like the evening air, sharp but true. As the sun dipped below the skyline, Ethan stood motionless, his mind racing. If she was right, he'd have to choose between his father's legacy and the project's survival, between emotion and reality, between the past and the future. He looked at Claire one last time that night. She was walking away, her clipboard under her arm, her figure framed by the fading light. And for the first time, Ethan realized this project wasn't just about construction. It was about rebuilding something far deeper. Faith, courage, maybe even love. But the universe wasn't done testing him yet. Because the next morning, when Claire arrived early, she discovered something hidden deep within the project files. A structural secret Ethan's father had left behind. One that could destroy everything they'd built together. Or save it forever. What if the truth you uncover could ruin the person you've come to care for? Claire Dawson sat alone in the quiet site office before sunrise, the sound of rain tapping gently on the window. She had barely slept. The blueprints in front of her told a story she wished she hadn't found. A design flaw, buried deep in the foundation plans, could make the building unstable. And the signature approving that flaw belonged to Ethan's late father. Her hands trembled as she traced the faded ink. Fixing this would mean tearing down everything Ethan had built so far. It could bankrupt his company, but ignoring it would mean risking lives. Either way, the truth would break someone's heart. Maybe both of theirs. How do you tell someone the truth when it might destroy everything they love? When Ethan arrived, soaked from the rain but smiling for the first time in weeks, Claire's heart ached. He held 2 coffees and said softly, "Peace offering. For all the times I snapped at you," she managed to smile, "you're improving. That's progress." But as she looked at him, his eyes still tired but hopeful, she felt the weight of the secret press harder on her chest. She wanted to protect him, to let him have one more peaceful morning before the storm she was about to bring. But she couldn't lie. "Ethan," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something you need to see." He frowned. "What is it?" She laid the blueprint on the table, pointing at the alignment error. "This section here, it's off by several inches. It might not look like much, but it changes how the load spreads through the entire structure." He studied the lines carefully, then shook his head. "No, that's impossible. My dad reviewed this design himself." Claire met his gaze. "I double-checked it 3 times. It's real, and if we don't fix it, the structure could fail within a year." The air went still. Ethan stepped back, the coffee cup slipping slightly in his hand. "You're saying my father made a mistake?" Claire's voice softened. "I'm saying he was human." He turned away, staring out the window. "You don't understand. He built this company with his own hands. Every beam, every brick. It's his legacy." She hesitated, then said quietly, "And that's exactly why we can't let it collapse." For a long time, neither spoke. The rain outside grew heavier, drowning the silence between them. Finally, Ethan said, "Let me think." His voice was low, distant, the kind of tone people use when the ground beneath them starts to shift. Sometimes doing the right thing means breaking your own heart. That afternoon, the storm worsened. Workers rushed to secure equipment, while Ethan stood in the middle of the site, staring up at the skeletal frame of the building. It looked strong on the surface, but he now knew the truth. Its foundation was flawed. He thought about his father, the man who'd taught him everything, who believed that strength was measured in what you built and who you stood by. How could he admit that the man he admired most had made a mistake that could destroy everything? When Claire joined him, holding an umbrella against the wind, he didn't look at her. "If we fix it, we'll have to tear down the entire south wing," he said. "That's half the budget gone." "I know," she said. "But if we don't, it could all come down someday. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but it will." He clenched his fists. "Do you have any idea what you're asking me to do?" "Yes," she whispered. "I'm asking you to be the man your father raised you to be." The words broke through his anger like a crack in stone. He turned to her, eyes wet with something between pain and gratitude. "Why are you helping me, Claire? You could just file the report and walk away." She looked up at him through the rain. "Because I see the kind of man you're trying to be. And because I've been where you are, trying to fix someone else's mistakes while pretending I wasn't breaking inside." Ethan blinked, realizing for the first time that she wasn't just an inspector doing her job. She was someone who understood loss, responsibility, and fear. That night, when everyone left, Ethan stayed again. He walked through the empty halls, hearing the echoes of his father's voice. "Son, buildings don't fail because of weakness. They fail because no one cared enough to notice." And suddenly he understood. His father wouldn't have wanted pride to bury truth. He would have wanted Ethan to build stronger, even if it meant starting over. What if rebuilding means losing everything you have left? The next morning, Ethan called a meeting. The crew gathered around, nervous. Claire stood beside him, quiet but steady. Ethan took a breath. "We found an issue in the foundation. It's serious. We're going to fix it. No shortcuts, no excuses." There were murmurs. One worker asked, "You mean we're tearing it down?" "Yes," Ethan said. "We are. Because we build things to last, not to look good on paper." The crew exchanged glances, but slowly they nodded. They respected him for owning it. After the meeting, Claire pulled him aside. "You did the right thing," he sighed. "Then why does it feel like I just lost everything?" She smiled softly. "Because truth always costs something, but what it gives back is worth more." Over the next few days, the site was a storm of motion. Machinery roared, dust filled the air, and workers dismantled the section his father had designed. Ethan watched every piece come down, each crash echoing like a goodbye. Claire stayed by his side, helping, guiding, encouraging. One night, as the last wall of the old structure came down, Ethan said quietly, "I think he'd be proud of this." Claire looked at him, her eyes gentle. "He would be proud of you." For the first time, Ethan smiled, not with relief, but with peace. But sometimes peace doesn't last when fate has one more test waiting. Just as the project began to recover, a white sedan pulled up to the site. A man in a gray coat stepped out. A city inspector, clipboard in hand, expression sharp. He flashed his ID and said flatly, "I'm here for an unannounced safety audit." Ethan exchanged a glance with Claire. She whispered, "He's one of the tough ones." The inspector walked through the site, his tone cutting. "Incomplete paperwork. Delayed progress. Foundation rework without prior approval." He turned to Ethan with a cold smirk. "Looks like you've got problems, Mr. Walker." Ethan's heart sank. They weren't ready for an audit. Not now. Not while the foundation was still under correction. The inspector leaned in. "If I find one more violation, I'll shut this entire site down." Ethan froze. The rain started again, soft but relentless. Claire touched his arm and whispered, Don't react. Stay calm. We'll handle this. He nodded, but his pulse was racing. Everything they'd fought to save, every ounce of progress, could vanish with one signature from that man's pen. And as the inspector disappeared into the unfinished structure with a flashlight, Ethan felt his throat tighten. Because sometimes the real danger isn't what's broken in concrete. It's what's hidden in people's intentions. Sometimes, the hardest walls to rebuild are the ones inside the heart. The air on the construction site was heavy that morning, not from dust or rain, but from fear. Ethan Walker stood near the foundation, his hands trembling as the city inspector's sharp voice echoed across the yard. The man flipped through reports with a smirk that made every worker uneasy. Claire Dawson watched silently from the side, her clipboard clutched tightly, her eyes darting between Ethan and the inspector. Ethan had been through tough days, but this one felt different. The inspector wasn't just looking for mistakes, he was looking for someone to blame. And Ethan knew it would be him. What do you do when everything you've rebuilt is about to be taken from you again? The inspector paced slowly, his polished shoes sinking slightly in the wet soil. You're telling me you tore down a whole section of foundation without city approval? He said coldly. That's a violation. Ethan took a breath, steady but nervous. We discovered a design flaw. It was a safety issue. We couldn't wait for paperwork. The inspector raised an eyebrow. Couldn't wait? Or didn't bother? Claire stepped forward. Sir, it was an emergency. The plans were unsafe. We have documentation. He turned toward her, unimpressed. And you are? Claire Dawson, she said firmly. Site inspector, independent. He gave her a long look. Independent. Convenient. Then he turned back to Ethan. You think the city will overlook this just because you meant well? Rules exist for a reason. Ethan clenched his fists. He wanted to shout, to defend himself, but he knew it would only make things worse. The inspector scribbled something on his clipboard. I'll be reviewing this further, he said, but if I don't like what I see, I'll have no choice but to shut this entire site down. With that, he walked away, calm, smug, and certain of the fear he'd planted. When the car disappeared down the road, Ethan finally exhaled. That man doesn't care about safety, he muttered. He just wants to look powerful. Claire touched his arm gently. Let's not lose focus. We did the right thing. We'll prove it. He looked at her, frustration in his eyes. Right thing or not, it won't matter if the city shuts us down. She didn't argue. She just looked at the half-finished building and said softly, Then we'll build proof too strong for anyone to ignore. When the world doubts you, sometimes you have to fight in silence. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The rain had stopped, but thunder still rolled faintly in the distance. He sat at his desk, reviewing reports, checking every calculation. Claire's notes were stacked beside his, neat, detailed, perfect. He found himself tracing the curve of her handwriting without realizing it. He wasn't sure when admiration had turned into something deeper. Maybe it was the way she stood up for him without hesitation. Maybe it was the way she saw through his anger and still stayed. But right now, emotions had to wait. He had a project to save. At sunrise, he and Claire met again at the site. Together, they inspected the rebuilt foundation, checked the supports, and photographed everything for documentation. Claire's calm presence kept him grounded. While Ethan barked orders to the crew, she handled the city paperwork, fast, precise, unflinching. Watching her work, he realized something. She wasn't just helping him rebuild a structure. She was helping him rebuild himself. Later that day, the workers gathered near the base, tired but motivated. One of them asked quietly, "Boss, you think they'll shut us down?" Ethan looked at the men who had followed him through every setback and said simply, "Not if we keep doing things right." His voice carried strength again, the kind Claire had been trying to remind him of. As the sun dipped low, the site began to transform. Machines rumbled back to life. Beams rose. Cement trucks rolled in. The project had a pulse again. Sometimes hope returns when you least expect it. That evening, Claire found Ethan sitting on a stack of wood, staring at the glowing city lights. "You didn't go home again," she said. He smiled faintly. "Home feels too quiet lately." She sat beside him. "You remind me of someone," she said after a moment. My brother. He ran a construction firm too. He never learned to rest until it was too late. Ethan looked at her. What happened to him? She paused, her eyes reflecting the lights of the city. He pushed too hard, ignored warning signs, lost everything. That's why I became an inspector. To make sure no one else forgets what matters. Ethan's expression softened. You think I'm like him? She smiled sadly. You're worse. You care too much, he laughed quietly, but her words stayed with him long after she left. That night, as he walked through the site, something caught his attention. A loose cable sparking near the main generator. He quickly shut it off and sighed. Even small things could bring everything down if ignored, just like life. He stood there under the dim lights, whispering, Dad, I wish you could see this. The past can build you up, or tear you apart. Days passed, and progress returned. Claire and Ethan became a team everyone respected. Workers followed orders more carefully, and even the mood of the site shifted. But beneath the progress, a quiet connection had formed between them. Unspoken, fragile, but real. Every morning, Ethan brought her coffee. Every night she stayed late to check his work. They didn't talk about it, but the warmth between them was undeniable. Then one afternoon, as the crew wrapped up, a delivery truck arrived with new materials. Except the paperwork didn't match. Claire frowned, scanning the forms. Ethan, she said slowly, this supplier isn't approved. These materials aren't on our list. He looked over her shoulder. That's strange. I didn't order from them. Claire narrowed her eyes. Then who did? Ethan made a few calls, confusion turning into concern. None of his staff admitted to authorizing the delivery. When he checked the supplier code, his stomach dropped. It traced back to the city office. Someone's trying to set us up, he muttered. Claire's eyes widened. If we use these materials, they'll claim we violated code. The inspector could shut you down instantly. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. We can't afford another fight. She looked at him, calm but firm. Then we don't fight dirty. We fight smart. They decided to document everything, every delivery, every detail, to prove their honesty. Claire spent the entire evening typing up a report while Ethan photographed the mislabeled shipments. By midnight, they were exhausted, but relieved. For the first time in weeks, they laughed. You know, Ethan said, leaning against a wall, you're not bad company for someone who makes me redo everything. She smiled. And you're not bad for someone who doesn't listen. They stood there in comfortable silence, both too aware of how close they'd become, but too afraid to say it aloud. Sometimes love builds quietly, until life forces it to speak. The next morning, Claire arrived early. Ethan was already at the site, reviewing the new safety certificates. He turned when he saw her, ready to share the good news. The report had cleared. The audit was almost over, but she wasn't smiling. Her expression was distant, unreadable. Ethan, she began softly. I got a call last night. There's a transfer offer, a senior position in Toronto. It's a big opportunity, he froze. You're leaving? She looked down. I haven't decided yet, but if I accept, I have to go next week. The papers in Ethan's hand fluttered in the wind. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he forced a smile. That's great news. You deserve it. She nodded, trying to smile back. Yeah, it is. But her eyes said something else. Regret. Longing. Something neither of them could name. As she walked away toward the office trailer, Ethan stood motionless under the rising sun. The building behind him was finally standing strong, steady, alive. But for the first time, he felt everything inside him beginning to crack. Would you let go of love to chase your dreams, or risk your dreams to keep love? Ethan Walker stood in the soft morning light, holding 2 cups of coffee just like every other day. One for himself, one for Claire Dawson. But today felt different. The air was heavy, like it already knew something his heart wasn't ready to face. Claire approached slowly, her steps quiet, her expression unreadable. I got an offer, she said softly. A big one. Downtown Toronto. Her words landed like a quiet storm. Ethan forced a smile, trying to sound calm. "That's incredible, Claire. Congratulations." But his voice betrayed him, trembling, uncertain. Claire looked down, her fingers nervously twisting the strap of her bag. "It's what I've worked for," she said. "Years of proving myself, and now it's finally happening." He nodded, staring at the unfinished building that now gleamed in the sunlight. "Then why do you sound like it's bad news?" She hesitated. "Because leaving means walking away from this. From what we built. From you. How do you say goodbye when your heart isn't ready?" The site was quiet that morning. Workers were gone for inspection day. Ethan and Claire stood side by side, looking at the completed structure. Strong, shining, everything they'd fought for. It should have been a moment of triumph, but instead, it felt like the end of something they couldn't name. Ethan took a slow breath. "You once told me buildings don't fail because they're weak. They fail because no one cares enough to notice." She smiled faintly. "You remember that?" "I remember everything you've said," he admitted quietly. For a moment, neither spoke. The city noise faded, leaving only the hum of the wind. Then Ethan asked the question he'd been afraid to voice. "Will you come back?" Claire looked at him, eyes glistening. "I don't know. Life doesn't always build straight lines, Ethan." He laughed sadly. "No, sometimes it just gives you corners you don't expect. Sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about believing someone will find their way back." The next few days blurred together. Claire prepared for her transfer, wrapping up reports, handing files to her replacement. The workers noticed the tension but said nothing. Everyone could feel it, the unspoken goodbye hanging in the air. Ethan buried himself in work, pretending everything was fine. But at night, he stayed late, walking through the halls they'd built together. Every wall, every beam carried her touch. He could almost hear her voice reminding him to double-check the measurements, teasing him about his stubbornness. On her last evening at the site, Claire found him in the office, staring at the framed blueprint on the wall, the one they'd redrawn the night they decided to start over. "You kept it," she said softly. He turned. "It's the only one that survived every storm." She smiled a little sadly. "Then it's perfect." They stood there in silence. Words would have been too small for what they felt. Pride, pain, gratitude. Something deeper neither dared to name. Finally, Claire said, "Promise me something. Anything. Keep building, even when it hurts." He nodded. "Only if you promise to keep believing, even when it's hard." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "You made me believe again, Ethan. In people. In starting over." And with that, she walked away before he could say another word. Because if she stayed a second longer, she might never leave. Sometimes silence says what words never can. Weeks passed. The project officially opened, complete and shining under the morning sun. The mayor cut the ribbon, cameras flashed, and Ethan stood proudly beside the building that now bore his father's name, Walker Tower. Reporters asked about the project's challenges, and Ethan smiled politely, giving professional answers. But inside, his heart was somewhere else, standing beside a woman who wasn't there. After the ceremony, when the crowd dispersed, Ethan stayed behind, walking through the quiet lobby. Every sound echoed, the creak of footsteps, the soft buzz of lights, and with each step, memories replayed. Claire's laughter, her calm advice, the way she looked at the building like it was alive. He reached his office and froze. A letter sat on his desk. No name on the envelope, but he knew the handwriting instantly. His chest tightened as he opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Claire standing in front of a skyscraper in Toronto, smiling proudly, hard hat in hand. On the back, written in her familiar neat handwriting, were 6 words that broke him and healed him all at once. Dreams don't die. They just move. Ethan sank into his chair, reading the line again and again until the words blurred. She hadn't said goodbye. Not really. She'd just written a new chapter. When one story ends, another quietly begins. Months went by. Walker Construction grew stronger than ever. Investors returned, new contracts poured in, and Ethan earned a reputation as a builder who never gave up, no matter the odds. But despite his success, there was still a quiet emptiness, a space no amount of concrete or steel could fill. Then one crisp winter morning, Ethan got a call from the Toronto firm. They wanted to collaborate, a joint project between his company and theirs. The client's name made his heart skip. Claire Dawson. He nearly dropped his phone. "Did you say Claire Dawson?" "Yes," the caller said. "She recommended your firm personally." For the first time in months, Ethan felt his heart race with something other than stress. He flew to Toronto a week later. The project site was massive, glass towers rising against the skyline, cranes moving like clockwork. And there she was, in the middle of it all, directing her team, her hard hat tilted slightly just like before. When she turned and saw him, her eyes widened. Surprise, disbelief, and something softer all at once. "Ethan," she said, breathless. He smiled, trying to sound casual. "You didn't think you'd get rid of me that easily, did you?" She laughed, that same sound he'd missed for months. "You came all this way for work?" He looked around at the steel and glass around them. Maybe for work, maybe for something else. They stood there, the city roaring around them, yet it felt like the world had gone silent. Sometimes love doesn't vanish. It just changes address. When life brings you full circle, do you take the second chance or let it slip again? That evening, they walked through the half-finished Toronto site. Claire showed him the plans and Ethan couldn't help but smile. "Your designs are stronger now," he said. She smirked. "You taught me to rebuild, remember?" As the sun set behind the glass towers, Ethan turned to her. "Maybe this time, we build something together. No transfers, no goodbyes." Claire looked at him, her eyes searching his. For the first time, she didn't have an answer. The city lights flickered to life around them, casting gold reflections on the steel beams. In that glow, the story that began with a broken promise now stood on the edge of something new. Ethan reached out his hand slowly. Claire hesitated for a heartbeat, then took it. They stood together, surrounded by unfinished walls, but for once, both felt complete. Because some buildings are made of concrete, and some are made of courage, forgiveness, and love that refuses to collapse. But just as they began to walk back toward the office trailer, Claire's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Her face went pale. Ethan frowned. "What's wrong?" She looked up, eyes wide. "Ethan, it's about the Toronto site. There's been a mistake in the design load calculations." His breath caught. "What kind of mistake?" She swallowed hard. "The kind that could bring everything down."